The problem with identity politics is that it focuses on what we have in difference rather than what we have in common. And therefore, it creates more problems than it solves because, by definition, it just actually looks at ways we are different and tries to separate us out based on whatever demographic or characteristic that people can think of. Um, the reasons why this happened, uh, it's probably hard to pin down, but there's a couple that I've thought of. One is that it's basically easier to do that because when you're doing that, you're not having to embrace someone else's humanity or individuality or accept them as an equal human being. You're able to marginalize them just by saying they are this kind of trait and these are the traits of, or this kind of characteristic, and these are the traits of people with that kind of characteristic, which is very unfair, and it creates a lot of knock-on problems, which I'll talk about in a minute. Maybe people do this because it's a Dunbar's number thing. If you don't actually know someone personally, then you look for what's indifferent. Now, I won't go into a whole lot about Dunbar's number now, but basically we can only truly know probably around about 150 to 200 people. It's actually a biological limit to do with the front of, I think it's our neocortex in our brain. There's a lobe that's, or a part of the brain that's directly related to our group size. And there's a linear relationship in primates between the size of that part of the brain and the actual group size that we exist in. And for humans, it's around about 150 to 200. So we live in a society that exists and functions outside of Dunbar's number, which I think is one of the shortcomings and faults of our society, and something I think we need to fix. But it's also kind of like a fight or flight response too. If you don't know someone, possibly they're a threat, so you look at other ways to characterize them, basically, that aren't based on a working and real relationship with that person. So our society is rife with that because our society exists outside of Dunbar's number. And also, I think when you do that, it's easier to, it takes the responsibility off yourself to get on with your own life. And to just accept that, well, this is another person, I should get to know this person. It gives you a way to blame rather than to just focus about getting on your life. That'll make more sense in a minute when I give some examples. But anyway, so look, as we all know, it happens a lot. Two kind of examples are, it's like saying all Muslims are terrorists or all men are rapists. And statistically speaking, of course, it's only an absolute minority of each that are. But when people, kind of besmirch everyone with the same thing, it's negative in two ways. First of all, it's bad it's just completely unfair towards those people who are all being tarred with the same brush. But when you've got people who are a bit marginal, what it does is that it can push them over the board, over the line into doing extremist things like becoming a terrorist or raping or whatever, because basically they're being told that something intrinsic to them is wrong. They can't change it. It's just the way they are. So therefore they're thinking, what the hell, it doesn't matter. Society doesn't care about me, so I'm not going to care about society. I'm just going to go and do whatever the hell I want. And it's also bad if you take say the rape thing now, or murder. If you look at male violence towards women, if you look at the statistics, it's actually a minority of women that ever experience it, and it's a minority of men that ever carry it out. But if you look at it in a simplistic, gendered way, which identity politics would have you do, so all men, men need to do this, men need to stop raping, and men need to, if you frame it as it's something intrinsic in men and men are responsible and men need to stop doing it, it also sends a message to the people who are the victims of those horrible crimes that it's just inevitable that it's going to happen to them, whereas it's not actually. And you look at the statistics and it's not. But it gives people a false impression of the severity or the likelihood of something like this happening, which is actually statistically extremely small. It's like, the chance of being killed by a terrorist is statistically extremely small. But if you propagate the view that all Muslims or all, whatever religion, all people of type X are terrorists or extremists or murderers or rapists or whatever, because there's so many of those kinds of people, you can end up losing your faith in yourself or your prospects in life, and consequently yourself, because you think it's just overwhelming and it's going to happen. But really what's happening is the process of breaking people up into those categories and only seeing them as that is giving you a false perception of, the chance of something like this happening. So it's bad for the people it's done to, but it's bad for the people who are also doing it, because it doesn't help them at all. I did write some notes here, but I think I've kind of said pretty much what I wanted to say. It's just bad. We've just got to love each other as human beings and as individuals, and get to know each other as individuals. And because of Dunbar's number, we can't get to know everyone, but what we can do when we meet people who we don't know is look for what we have in common, look for the similarity, rather than get an immediate knee-jerk response about what we have in difference. Another point I did want to make is that any ideology or any viewpoint that promotes the interests of one demographic or one one characteristic of people, whatever, however you want to divide people up, any viewpoint that promotes their interests eventually becomes a voice of repression once it gains its own ascendancy or gets a go itself. So that's why, for instance, I don't, even though I want the best outcomes for people of all gender, that's why I don't call myself a feminist, because feminism, or even the men's rights movement as well, anything that promotes the interests of just one group of society will eventually become a voice of repression, because whenever it gets a go just to carry out its own desires, then it's basically forcing them. And it's better to have a holistic approach where you're trying to do what's good for everyone, rather than just try and do what's good for one particular part of society. Or because again, it's identity politics. You're breaking people down into certain characteristics and just trying to do something just for them, which eventually means that you're going to be doing things just for them and not for other people. So it becomes a voice of repression, or a mechanism of repression. So it's best to just have a holistic viewpoint, try and do what's best for everyone. If you're working in one area because you feel you can get more done in that one area, only work in that area in that way that you would work for other people. Let me get this right. You would only work in that area in such a way that it's actually good for everyone, not just for that area. So you actually want to be promoting or carrying out actions that will work for everyone, not just a particular interest group you're working for. So that probably says it all. It's just a matter of just accepting and understanding and learning and just holding out that part in ourselves that allows us to give credence or let other people in, even if we don't know them, and then get to know them and appreciate them. And don't have a knee-jerk reaction where we start to label people, because as others have pointed out, as soon as you start to divide people up, well, you look at the history of, well, any history really, but you can look at it in the 20th century, how many people died because of that kind of thing, and it's gone on all throughout history, and it's exactly the same mindset going on there, like say with the Holocaust, as it is with any of the thought processes that label people as all having the same characteristic based on a way of dividing them up separately. Probably said that really badly, but you know what I mean. It's just we've got to see what we have in common rather than what we have in difference. What we have in difference just leads to death and mayhem. What we have in common leads to love and understanding and peace. Simple as that. Thanks. Just a quick additional thought, which I thought just after I filmed that. I think why people go towards identity politics and racism, because they're both the same really. Why people default to that kind of quick knee-jerk thinking is that if you have to get to know someone, so if you've met someone outside your close group, outside your Dunbar's number, uh, if you have to get to know them, you're making yourself vulnerable. You're having to spend time and space, and be in an intimate, like a close space with them, and in doing that, you're making yourself vulnerable. So it's just a protection mechanism to avoid the risk of that. And I can understand the reasonings for why that evolved. And in our hunter-gatherer days, when we were living in smaller groups of, up to 150, 200, we knew everyone in the group. And we people may have exercised that with people outside their group, which is why it evolved. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you in order to overcome the limits of racism or identity politics, you have to get to know someone else, someone who you may fear, and that just makes you vulnerable. And so people don't do it because they don't want to be vulnerable. It really is as simple as that. But when you actually do it, what do you find? You find that the person you're fearful of is another human being, and you find that they've got their shortcomings and they've got their strengths and their weaknesses, their shortcomings, their good things and their bad things. But you find they're just another human being like you, and finding that overcomes half of or probably even more than that of the bad things, and it also works for the other person as well. They'll feel more understood and loved and accepted as well, and that overcomes most of the problems. The problems that it won't overcome are more inherent things to do with mental illness and stuff like that. Which is why in this world that it's never going to be a perfect world, and we still have to be cautious about what we expose ourselves to, how vulnerable we make ourselves, and things like that. But what I'm saying is that there's a whole lot more that can be overcome before we ever come up against those kind of issues or those limits. And just good lines of communication and good understanding of different people solves most of the problems. And we wouldn't be so fearful of other people, and other people wouldn't be so fearful of us, because we're just all human beings, and we're all alive, and we all just need to love each other and just just be good to each other, essentially. Okay, there you go. So overcome the vulnerabilities, or the fear of the vulnerabilities is what I'm saying. I mean, I'm not saying put yourself in situations which which are going to be risky, but the situations that people often hold back from aren't as risky as they think. And once you get to know other inverted commas types of people, you find we have more in common than we can ever have in difference. It's as simple as that.